Welcome back, Grimdark enthusiasts. I hope you're all doing well. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at something I've looked forward to for some time now. Having been a fan of the Stormcast Eternal since their release, I'd always wanted to apply a dark, gothic and menacing aesthetic to one of their impressive character miniatures, and an upcoming painting competition at my local Warhammer store provided the perfect opportunity. With a primary focus on bronze armour and how to create a realistic, varied and eye-catching verdigris effect using mixed media and different techniques, I'll also show you one way of rendering weather-beaten, ancient and grimdark cloth. If you're a fan of dark fantasy, you're not going to want to miss this. I'm Black Chalice Studio, and you are watching the Grimdark Compendium. I'd just like to take a second to thank you all on behalf of the team here at the Compendium. Your support and enthusiasm for our content means a great deal to us. If you enjoy what we do and want to see more, please consider joining us and supporting our small team of artists by becoming a member of the Grimdark Compendium. It is most greatly appreciated. Now it's time to channel that brooding, dystopian and grimdark atmosphere. So, it's on with the show. Bastion is a great sculpt straight out of the box, with a menacing pose, ornate heavy armour, and plenty of different surfaces to experiment with. As per usual though, I like to make some changes and additions, just to create some individuality, extra character, and a more imposing silhouette. My first portal call was to add a cheesecloth layer over the large cape to break up the large expanse of plastic, and give the look of an ancient, weather-beaten burlap. On top of this, I added some fine chain and adornments, along with a different icon atop his back, using some Stormcast bits I had laying around. A weapon swap from his traditional hammer to a greatsword was next up, followed by the Tamiya putty texturing technique on the areas of leather, and finally a hood made from cheesecloth to give a more menacing and brooding overall look. Before putting any paint to the miniature, I came in with my standard pre-weathering steps, battle damage and scratching using a combination of scalpel and pick tool, then my texturing stages using Green Stuff World mud, AK corrosion paste and Vallejo thick mud. I then primed the miniature with Stynel Res Black before applying an airbrush coat of Vallejo Light Olive to the cloak, followed by a zenithal highlight of Deepkin Flesh. I'll take a moment here to talk about custom colour mixes. I've tried a bunch of different bronze paints from multiple manufacturers and ranges, and I'm yet to find one that I'm happy with straight from the pot, finding them either too light or the wrong hue for my tastes. So with that in mind, I decided to create my own bronze colour by combining other paints together. I settled on a 2-to-1 mix of pro-acryl magnesium and light bronze in the end, with the resulting colour in the middle of the range in terms of brightness, perfect to shade down and highlight up from, and just right for me in terms of the hue. With the ratio worked out, I mixed up a large batch of this and filled a spare bottle with the mix, giving it a unique name. Now if I paint multiple miniatures from a force, the colour stays consistent throughout. So with our armour colour set, I went about laying down the other base coats on the miniature. The armour is a 1-to-1 mix of our custom bronze and black, the apron is a custom leather mix, the steel's a lead belcher, the gold is a custom gold mix, and the reds are ammo atom red. Over the dark, semi-matte armour colour we just laid down, I'll thin down some of our custom bronze, lightly load a brush, and stipple over all the armour panels, avoiding the crevices and gaps. This will not only provide nice contrast, but the stippling will build up a very slight pitted feel. And with the same application method, I'll add a touch of silver to the mix and apply several very thin stippled layers to the highest points and raised edges. Because we're working with translucent paint and a very lightly loaded brush, All we're really doing here is bringing back that metallic shine, rather than blocking out opaque layers. And here's how we're looking with all of the base coats applied. Okay, so let's look at my choice of unifying wash for the armour. With the bronze being in the mid-range in terms of brightness, I wanted something fairly dark to create good contrast in the shadows whilst retaining a rich brown hue. So I decided on a 1-to-1 mix of Goon's Grime and Decrepit Filth, thinned just a touch to increase the flow a tad. When it comes to the application, I'll apply a good even coat, not going too heavy to avoid any pooling. And on the areas of deepest shadow, I'll come back with a second pass to reinforce that darker effect. I wanted the wash to be very pronounced, so I waited around 30 minutes before coming back in. To really push the shadows down and create some more contrast, along with some surface finish variation by way of a satin sheen, I added some Ichor of the Damned to steer the unifying wash towards more of an oily blackish colour. This was then carefully applied to the joints, areas of shadow and deepest crevices. A quick blast from the blow dryer on medium heat just to flash off the shading pass, and we can move on. For the reductive pass on the unifying wash, I come in very selectively using a lightly dampened Q-tip. Because we left the wash a good while before coming back in, it will have a good hold on the acrylic layers, so here I just reactivate and remove the wash from the raised edges and details and the broader, more open areas of armour. I'll swap out to a brush to tackle any hard to reach areas where a Q-tip would be too large. For the foundation of our Verdigris effect, I'm going to come in with another custom mix. Codia Green is a super intense, very saturated and densely pigmented green hue. This, combined with a dusty, powdery, slate grey of all is dust, is a great mix for these purposes, giving a muted, old and weather-beaten patina style effect. When applying this mix, I'll come in neat, with a fairly lightly loaded brush, starting off by hitting the recessed areas of the armour, before glazing some on to the more open, flat portions as well. We can build this up over several layers to create a more pronounced look. This mix will give us a mid-range oxidised base layer that we can add to with darker tones and more vibrant hues as we progress. As we blow dry this foundation layer, you'll be able to see it take on that chalky, textured and powdery finish that comes from all is dust. I find it really cool to see this happen right before your eyes. With our initial effect now flashed off, you can see that the granulated, powdery look is very prominent, giving us that distinctive textured finish associated with Verdigris. By allowing the foundation mix to cure for a while, the base will begin to evaporate, leaving us with this wonderful, chunky, thick and sticky pigment residue. We can use this to reinforce the most textured and oxidised areas by deliberately dotting and stippling this on to the deepest crevices and joints. This will dry super powdery and with a densely particulated finish. In a similar manner to how I approached a reductive pass on our unifying wash, I came in here with the Q-tip very lightly dampened with spirits, to feather the Verdigris foundation away from all of the raised edges and details. For the more open and flat areas of armour, I concentrated on gently reactivating the wash and creating smooth transitions and a mottled look between the areas of clean armour and the patches of Verdigris. Now we can move on to introducing some of that super light, almost white looking oxidation effect. Once again, we're going to use Codia Green for that rich, deep hue, but this time I'll add a touch of Decay of Death. Decay of Death dries to a very light, almost white finish, which is super matte and nicely textured. This combination will give us our lightest shade. I'll place this very selectively and sparingly, saving it for some of the deeper recesses over top of our previously applied foundation. It's quite easy to overdo this step and cover up all of our previous work, so just take your time, study those reference pictures of real-life verdigris, and go lightly. Once again, we can observe the magic happen as we blow dry this mix. When the decay of death begins to cure, you'll see that white, decayed and powdery look begin to appear in real time. Coming in with a very light touch, we'll perform a quick feathering pass here to remove the previous step from the top of details, raised edges and centre of the flat armour panels. With these steps complete, this is how we're looking so far. With our initial oxidation steps complete, we can now start to push the contrast on the armour even further. First up, we'll come in with our original base colour, diluted until it's translucent. I'll load up a fine detail brush, then wipe the bristles on the back of my glove, so there's only a small amount of pigment left. Then I'll begin picking out the upper facing edges of the armour, details and flat sections, using a combination of stippling and applying small lines and dots to simulate tiny scratches and dents. By adding a touch of silver to the mix, we can place a few sparse highlights to the very top edges of the plates and details. I'll also use this mix to reinforce the scratching laid out in the previous step. Whilst we're working on contrast, we'll come in here to darken off the joints between the armour plates and delineate one area of the miniature from another. For this, I'll glaze on some neat Ichor of the Damned, carefully and deliberately placed. The contrast we can add here, from the dark recesses to the bright highlights, will really make the armour pop. To add just a touch more pop to the armour, I'm going to come in for one final highlight using true metals. These are a wax-based product that are thinned and removed using spirits, just like enamels and oils. I'll gradually add some silver into brass until I have a very light hue and thin this down to a similar consistency as the acrylic highlights from earlier. I'll concentrate this towards the top of the armour here, like the shoulders, upper chest and arms, avoiding anywhere that's either in the shade or where light wouldn't reach. By coming in with a brush ever so slightly dampened with spirits, we can feather the true metals into the surrounding area, creating an extremely smooth blend and natural finish as shown here. One final step we can take to really push that verdigris to a realistic, varied finish is introducing some small areas of highly saturated turquoise. For this, I'm going to combine both oils and enamels. Taking some turquoise oil, I'll add some Ichor of the Damned to muddy it up a touch, and then thin it down to a wash consistency using spirits. This is applied in a few select areas that I'd like to read as more vibrant, like a very controlled pin wash application. We don't want to overdo this step. The final touch is adding a couple of spots of pure turquoise as a pin wash once again, using this as our brightest and most saturated colour. For any areas that seem a bit too vibrant, we can come in with a glaze of Ichor of the Damned to bring down the brightness and saturation. This will blend flawlessly with the oil and enamel pin wash we've just applied, giving super smooth transitions. I like to work this way most of the time, going from dark to light and back again until I'm satisfied. With that done, our armour is complete, with a realistic, weathered and oxidised bronze rendered. Now let's move on to showing the process of achieving a weather-beaten, ancient and tattered burlap cloak. When we applied the unifying wash of Goon's Grime and Decrepit Filth to the armour earlier, the same mix is used on the cloak. After giving this around 45 minutes to dry, I came back in for a very basic reductive pass, starting with Q-tips and switching over to a brush for areas requiring finer control. I was very loose and relaxed here, not aiming for precision and welcoming any patchy areas, as these will add to the old, worn and weathered look. To reintroduce some colour and begin to press the dirty, grimy and stained effect I'm aiming for, I came in with several glazes of slightly thinned Goon's Grime, I applied one very controlled glaze to all of the cloak, laying down the initial tone, then came back with multiple successive layers in areas of shadow, towards the bottom where the cloak would meet the ground, and in places I wanted the heaviest build-up of grime. The more layers of glazing you add here, the stronger the overall effect will be. To create some more contrast and a darker look, I mixed a touch of decrepit filth into the goon's grime and roughly stippled this in to the folds, to areas I wanted a more shaded finish, and once again towards the bottom of the cloak to show the effect of the hem being dragged through the dirt and dust of some ancient and unforgiving landscape. Because we're applying this directly after the glazing steps, this will blend with the underlying colour, creating an interesting, mottled and varied finish. Another effect I wanted to add to really tap into that Dark Souls vibe was to set about making the hem and edges of the cloak look as if it had been scorched by fire, perhaps during battle in a burning castle or as a result of the use of pyromancy, adding an extra layer of atmosphere and detail. To start with, I took some Stynylrez black primer on an old frayed brush, deloaded the bristles onto the back of my glove, and then began to dry brush and stipple this on, starting at the very bottom and gradually fading the effect out as I moved my way up the cloak just a little. I then repeated the same step using Abaddon black, covering less area, concentrating more towards where the cloak would meet the ground. Moving on to the last couple of effects today, next up was the addition of some spattering and stain marks. I mixed up a dark, muddy and oily brown using Goon's Grime and Ichor the Damned. I loaded up the same brush I used for the scorched effect, then used a pick tool to flick against the bristles, spattering the mix onto the cloak in small droplets, creating visual interest and adding to that ancient and dirty look we're trying to achieve. Our last effect for the cloth is going to be some subtle patches of decay. I mixed a touch of Goon's Grime into Decay of Death to give a nasty, green, grey-brown colour and thin this down roughly 50-50 with Spirit. Using a lightly loaded brush, this was stippled on sparingly to a select few areas. I made one initial pass, then a second in a few spots to increase the effect. After a quick blow dry on medium heat, we can come in with a brush dampened with spirits to break up any hard edges left on the decay patches, blending them in and softening the look where required. With that final step complete, we've now finished our worn, weather-beaten and grimdark burlap cloak. For the steel areas on the miniature and the rust effects, I use a variety of techniques, ranging from spot washes to lay down foundation or rust layers, stippling to add mottled and varied highlights, and the use of dirty down rust to give a heavily corroded look. Check out my last YouTube video for a detailed rundown of this process. And for the leather areas like the cape and pouches, I utilise stippled and scratched base coats to achieve a textured and realistic base, Villainy ink filters and glazes to introduce different hues, the scrubbing layer technique with Ichor the Damned, and soft pressing to create scale realistic and striking worn, cracked and weathered leather. I'll talk in depth about my approach to leather in a future video. And here is Bastion Carthalos in all his gritty, heavily weathered and grimdark glory. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. I had an absolute blast creating and painting this project, and hope to bring some more moody Stormcast to life very soon. So for now, I bid you a good week, keep it grim, and I'll see you next time.